All right. How's the stream? Good morning, good evening. How's everyone doing? How's the stream on the chat, everyone? All good? Awesome. Welcome to AppWrite's second Hacktoberfest. This isn't our first. This is yet another year we are participating. Hacktoberfest is one of our favorite events that we participate in. I'm your host, Tessa Merrill, and I am streaming all the way from Washington State in the Seattle area. We have a few great speakers today. We have Christy Jacob, who will be giving an introduction to what is Hacktoberfest. And then next we have Roselle Scarlett, who will be giving an introduction to what is Git and GitHub. And finally, to end the stream, we have a fireside chat with John O'Bacon and I. And now I will welcome you, our lead engineer and one of our original employees at AppWrite, Christy Jacob.
Hey Tessa, thank you for having me. Thank you for that warm introduction. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I bought a box of energy drinks last week, and I'm drinking one of my final cans of it. By the way, it's very bad for you and something I don't do very often. I don't want to die early. I want to live a long life. So this is a very occasional moment. I love energy drinks so much, though.
So what was the occasion?
We launched on Product Hunt last week, and I wanted to make sure I was awake, alive, and supporting every minute I can support. And that required a little boost of energy, and sometimes coffee is not enough. And it made things more exciting. So we got number 1 product of the day on Product Hunt, and we also got number 2 product of the week. So producthunt.com. It's really great and really exciting accomplishment for us.
Definitely. It was indeed an amazing achievement that everybody in the community have been working towards for the past 3 years. So it's really great.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
So shall I get started with sharing my screen?
Sure. Let's make sure your slides work, and then I will hop out of the stream once you get started, and then I'll join back when you're done.
Okay.
All right. That's your presenter view. It gets a little tricky showing slides on StreamYard. There we go. Yeah, that looks great. Awesome.
Great. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Tessa. Thank you, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, from wherever you're joining. Really excited to host the second session in AppWrite's series of events for this year's Hacktoberfest. And we're going to be taking a look at what Hacktoberfest is and go over how you can contribute, how you can be a good contributor, and how you can contribute to AppWrite, and how you can get connected with the AppWrite community in general. So this is going to be like a repeat of the session we had on Saturday. So in case you missed that session, be sure to pay attention now. So who am I? As Tessa mentioned, I'm one of the engineering leads here at AppWrite. And Hacktoberfest as an event has been it's a really important event for me. I got my first job, or my job in AppWrite through my first Hacktoberfest contribution. So it really is it means a lot to be here, speaking about Hacktoberfest. I've been on both sides of the table. I've been a contributor for a few years and then a maintainer. So I can share some really good perspectives on what it's like to be on both sides. Now, with that aside, let's get started with this session. So in the session, we're mainly going to cover what Hacktoberfest is, what it stands for, the Hacktoberfest values that we need to understand, how you can contribute to AppWrite, what's in store from AppWrite this year during Hacktoberfest, and how you can get connected with us on Discord. So what exactly is Hacktoberfest? Going by the textbook definition, Hacktoberfest is a month-long celebration of open source software. It's run by DigitalOcean, and it's open to everybody from first-time contributors to seasoned open source developers. So whether you're just getting started or whether you've been contributing for a while, it's a really good opportunity to participate in this month-long event and share the vibes with everybody else who's contributing along with you. Now, before we get started, we need to understand what exactly Hacktoberfest stands for, and what are things that we need to keep in mind. So firstly, everybody is welcome. There's no restriction on who can participate. So whether you're a student, you're a working professional, whether it's your first time contributing, or whether you've been maintaining large scale projects, you're all welcome to participate. Quality is fun. Sorry, quantity is fun, but quality is key. Now, I know it can be very exciting to get your first PR merged. I myself was really excited when my first PR got merged, and I can understand the excitement. However, we need to keep in mind that just quantity is not the aspect that we need to focus here. The quality of the PRs is really paramount. Because once Hacktoberfest is over, Hacktoberfest may just be a month, but once it's over, your PRs are going to stay there forever, right? It's some of them, and sometimes it's even going to make it to the eyes of some recruiter who's going to look at your profile somewhere down the line, right? And it's good. It needs to be a good reflection of who you are, your PRs basically. It shows you what kind of code you write. It shows you how you communicate with the maintainers. It shows you how you talk to people. So it's a reflection of who you are, and it's very important to put the best version of yourself out there. So make sure you focus on quality. While documentation fixes, or fixing one word or fixing one character in the documentation is fine once in a while. However, that should not be the majority of the contributions that you make. You should also focus on maybe some features or fixing some bugs, and something more meaningful which would add value to the project. Next is short-term action and long-term impact. As I mentioned before, Hacktoberfest may be just a month-long event. However, your PRs are here to stay, right? Some of you might be making contributions to really huge projects like React or Vue.js, and your contributions might even make it to the master or the main branch, right? And when this happens in the next release, your code is going to be out there in the hands of thousands or if not millions of developers. So your small action that you made during this month-long celebration of open source is going to end up in the hands of millions of developers. They're going to be using your code. So you need to keep that in mind as well when you're making your contributions. Now, there are four main types of audiences or people that you find that typically participate in Hacktoberfest. So first are the contributors. It's usually you and me, usually beginners who are just getting started in open source, who are really excited about the event, who've been wanting to find a project to contribute to. They form a majority of the audience that participate in Hacktoberfest. Secondly, it's the maintainers. So maintainers are usually the creators of open source projects. In some larger projects, you'll also find that the creators cannot manage all of it by themselves. So they usually have other folks helping them out, and they form like a group of folks who help triage issues, who help review pull requests. And without maintainers, it wouldn't be possible to have Hacktoberfest. And so maintainers are like these unsung heroes who really help kick Hacktoberfest forward. Next set of people are the companies. So if you are a company and if you're looking forward to expand your audience and get more developers involved, Hacktoberfest is a really good opportunity for you to maybe open source some of your projects on GitHub or GitLab, and invite contributions to your project. I think there were a couple of really amazing case studies from SendGrid, AppWrite, and even in companies like Indeed, who where they had like a huge influx of developers who came in to contribute to their projects during Hacktoberfest, and that led to a lot of visibility for their company. So if you're a company looking out to expand your audience, is a great opportunity. And as a company, you also have other ways that you can contribute to open source projects, and it's not just code. So for example, there are a lot of these open source projects, they receive no monetary backing, right? They're maintained by individual developers who don't really receive a lot of monetary support. So organizations like Open Collective make it possible for us to fund these projects, because there are a lot of costs involved in running open source projects. It can be sometimes it can be just trivial as the cost associated with hosting the docs or the landing page, but as the project grows, there can be more serious costs, and there's no way to fund these apart from the external support. So if you're a company, please be on the lookout for projects asking for sponsorships, and that would be great help as well. Finally, event organizers. So event organizers, for example, let's say you are somebody who's really interested in getting into developer advocacy, and you would love to build a community around the open source developers. So this is a great opportunity because people around this time, they're looking for a lot of resources around how to get started, how to make your first pull request, how to find good issues on GitHub and stuff like that. So if you can organize some events, or if you can have these talks, or live streams which cater to these issues, it's going to be a good topic that people are going to be searching for over the next 1 month. And just like this event where we're going to talk about Git and GitHub and stuff, and later down the line, you can have these either online or offline or even hybrid events in your community, and it can be a great point to get started. And during this time, I'm sure that DigitalOcean also offers some support. They do have some event kits that you can use during this time. So if you are not a very creative person, you can get a lot of assets from DigitalOcean, which they've shared publicly on the Hacktoberfest website. So that can be really useful as well. Now, why would you join Hacktoberfest? So, firstly, it's a great opportunity to get your start into open source. Now, going back to my 2019, I believe that's when I was getting started with open source. I always found it intimidating, and I feel that's the case with a lot of people as well. Basically, it's the scale of the projects, and the complexities and the terminologies. You don't know what Git is or GitHub is. You don't know what a merge request or a pull request is. You don't know what is a rebase. You don't know what's a merge commit, right? So there's a lot of complexity that's involved, and a lot of us feel like imposters trying to get started. But this during this 1 month, everybody around you is in this mood and in this celebration, in this celebratory spirit, and everybody's we're really excited to help new people, right? So the mindset of people itself is very welcoming during this time, and it can be a great time to get started because everybody's ready to receive new contributors, and a lot of projects are also going to open up beginner friendly issues, which are usually labeled as good first issues, and these are the ones that you can always get started with. Now, next one is to appreciate and give back to the community. As I mentioned, a lot of the time, open source work is completely voluntary, and the maintainers and the creators are not appreciated enough. And this is a great time to give back to those projects, to contribute both in terms of code, or by making other pull requests, or in terms of monetary support. Next, it's a great opportunity to learn, build, and push the limits of your knowledge. This entire month is like a playground for you. You have a lot of time to focus on, picking up a project that you've been really wanting to, that you've been keeping it aside for a long time, because it's very likely that this project is going to open up some good first issues during this time, and it's going to be something that pays off very well in the future, because once you get started, the next time it's going to be much more easier, right? It's always the challenge associated with getting started for the first time. So I would really urge you to spend some extra time, even if you don't make your first pull request. It's perfectly fine, because Hacktoberfest is here to stay. If not this year, you can always make a contribution next year, but your efforts are really going to go a long way and pay off in the long run. Finally, it's an opportunity to collaborate with your peers and beyond. So essentially, with platforms like GitHub and GitLab, it basically opens the world to you, right? You can be interacting with maintainers from the US, from Europe, from Southeast Asia, from different parts of the world, and which would otherwise have been impossible, right? And as you grow as a developer, as you advance in your career, I'm assuming that most of the audience that participates in Hacktoberfest are students. So as you advance in your career, the communication and collaborating with people becomes a really important skill to pick up. And open source software is a very very good place to get started. And Hacktoberfest is a perfect launchpad for you to get started in open source development. Now, so typically, until now, Hacktoberfest used to be focused around code contributions. However, it had come to the realization of DigitalOcean and other folks involved that code is not the only way to contribute to open source. And something interesting that we tried at AppWrite last year is we have this repository called Awesome AppWrite. Essentially, it's a collection of amazing AppWrite resources which is created by the community, and we compile all of them into one repository so that everybody can find them, right? And this includes stuff like videos which people have made for us, demo apps, blog posts, and a lot of other stuff. And we got creative and we thought, hey, what if somebody wants to write a blog post for us, right? How do we let them write this and also count towards a Hacktoberfest contribution? So we opened up some issues on this repository and invited folks to share the links of their blog post as a pull request to this repository. This way, we were able to encourage people to contribute in ways other than code, and also get these contributions counted for Hacktoberfest, right? And this was a huge success. We actually had more contributions in terms of writing and non-code related stuff than we had for code itself. So it was a really huge success, and we're definitely going to do it again this year round. And DigitalOcean has also made it a point to emphasize that this year. So this year they're going to be a lot. You can find this trend in a lot more repositories, because DigitalOcean also wants other projects to focus on low code and non code contributions as well. So this can be a good opportunity if you're not really strong on the technical side, if you rather prefer writing, or if you're a designer and you're on the creative side. So it's going to open a lot more avenues for you to contribute, because an open source project is not just about code. A lot of times it's about the documentation, the creatives, the issue triaging, answering questions on the pull request. So there's a lot of ways to contribute, and this year you're going to have much more avenues to contribute to with this change. Apart from this, I think a lot of rules from last year remain the same. There's going to be like this 14-day review period once you create your PR, to give maintainers enough time to review your PRs. Maintainers can also participate in Hacktoberfest, and the maintainer actions also count towards your contributions. So let's say you merge a PR, or let's say you approve a PR, you leave reviews on PRs, you add some labels to the PR. So all these maintainer actions, I don't want to say something wrong, but please verify the list with the official rules. Maintainer actions also count towards contributions. So if you're a maintainer and aren't getting enough time to make code contributions, please note that these your contributions, they're also your actions are also counted as contributions, and I think they add up to the points as well. So we need to discuss some good contribution practices, because creating a pull request is not as straightforward or as straightforward as it seems. So firstly, a contributing guide is a really important document for any open source project. This document highlights how the project is structured, what coding conventions are followed, how to set up the project, how to run the tests, what maybe even how what are the steps to create a pull request, how to create how to what the workflow for creating a pull request, whether you start with an issue first, whether every pull request needs to be associated with an issue, and a lot of other instructions that you need to make a successful PR, right? Now what's going to end up happening is, if you don't read this contributing guide, you just make your first PR, it's very likely that the maintainers are going to come back to you and say, hey, your PR is missing this and X and Y. Please take a look at our contributing guide, right? So it's going to lead to a lot of to and fro, and and it's just going to ultimately it's going to delay the merging of your PR. So to make things faster and to make things more efficient for both you as well as the maintainers, it is really helpful to take a look at the contributing guide. And as Tessa mentioned in the previous session, sometimes some projects don't have contributing guides, and that can be a really good place to start. You can write a contributing guide for this project. Now, if you're unsure, it's always a good idea to refer to other projects which already have contributing guides. Read through it, what it discusses, and adapt the relevant points for the new project. And you can also, while during this time, you should also discuss with the maintainers on what they would like to see in the contributing guide, and make sure your contributing guide complies with what they need, what the project needs. Great. Now that you have the contributing guide, set done, you need to have a descriptive commit messages. So this is if you're familiar with the Git tool, you will know that with every commit you need to have a message that goes with it, right? And it's like a one-line summary of what your code change does. Typically, projects follow something called conventional commits. So typically there's like a first prefix, which is I think 5 to 6 keywords like fix, feat, or chore or docs or something like that, and followed by the scope of your pull request, followed by a few words which describe it, right? So again, the contributing guides are going to have most of the instructions on how to do this, so you're going to find it there. If it doesn't, it's always safe to default to the conventional commit guidelines. Next, make sure that your pull request in GitHub, or your merge request in case of GitLab, contains a summary of what changed and why. So because open source is such an async environment, when you create a pull request, the maintainer is going to probably review it when they wake up, right? There may not be an overlap between the times that you guys are online at the same time. So it's very helpful. So the only source of information that they have is the pull request description. So make sure this is as descriptive as possible. And you can make it as informative as possible. Where some of the good tips are, for example, You can add screenshots, you can add maybe even screen recordings. So the more information you can add to this pull request, the easier it's going to be for the maintainer to review it, and the lesser to's and fro's that it's going to arise, right? So make sure you do that. Use existing code examples for as examples for code style, right? For example, let's say you don't know what coding style is being followed, or let's say the contributing guidelines do not have any mention of this. Firstly, you can add it. Secondly, you can take a look at the code that's already present in the main branch. That should give you a good idea of what's the indentation that's being followed, what is the level of indentation, what's the what kind of coding conventions are followed. Next, you need to ensure that every PR addresses and references a single problem. So very often, we see that some PRs can get really large with a lot of commits, a lot of file changes, and it gets very hard to to review them as a maintainer. So make sure that every PR is associated to a single issue on that repository, and it fixes a single problem. Another important thing is that your PR should pass all the tests. This applies mostly to coding code changes rather than, let's say, documentation. We need to ensure that our change doesn't break the functionality of the project, right? And typically, most projects will have a test suite which is already in place, and you need to make sure that you run the tests locally before you create a PR, so that you can again avoid a lot of to and fro's, because once the maintainer sees that the tests are failing, they're definitely going to ask you to fix the tests, right? And then push another commit with the fixed test. So make sure you do that so that you can avoid one more step in the communication. Okay, so as contributors, we need to know how to be a good contributor, right? So we talked about how quality is more important than quantity. So make sure that majority of your pull requests don't focus on like single line changes or single word changes, trying to fix just the docs and stuff or typos. Review previously merged contributions. This is a hack that I really love to use. Let's say I don't have a lot of time to go through the entire project and to understand it, right? Previously merged pull requests are a very good example for you to understand what are the naming conventions being followed, because the pull request, because the previous pull request was also focusing on a single issue. It would have a much more smaller scope for you to look into, right? So it's going to have, let's say, 5 or 6 files that have changed, and few comments to look through. So this is gonna, and it's also going to have the comments and the communication that happened on the PR before it was merged, so you can understand what changes were requested by the maintainer on this previous PR. It's going to help you see the naming conventions being used for the variables, for the files, and all of that stuff, right? So once you look at a PR that's been merged, it's going to give you a good idea of what your PR should look like to increase the likelihood of it getting merged. Don't call dibs on issues. Now, it's very common that I know you can't contain your excitement, and it's really everybody's in a rush to get their issues, their pull requests in. But you need to understand that you need to give everybody a chance. So if you already have an issue assigned to yourself, it's advisable to wait for a couple of days and get that pull request in, get your first pull request in before you start calling dibs on other issues as well. So as a rule of thumb, have one or at max two issues at a time. Work on them, get them complete, and then you can move on to the next one. Wait for a couple of days before you ask for an issue to be reassigned. Now, as you start exploring projects, and as you start exploring issues that you can contribute to, you'll notice that some of the issues may have gotten stale. So stale essentially means that there's been no activity on that issue for a long period of time, and you might be really tempted to ask the maintainer to reassign it to you when it's already assigned to somebody else, right? Now, there can be a lot of reasons for this to happen. Firstly, yes, the existing assignee may have chosen to abandon that issue. Maybe don't have the time. Maybe they're no longer interested. Yes, that's a very fair assumption. In which case, yes, it can be reassigned. But very often, it can also be the case that they're still working on it. They just got busy with something else. So constantly pinging the maintainers to reassign the issue is not really helpful. It's always nice to let's say a rule of thumb is to wait for, let's say, a week, uh, and when you see that there's been no activity, then you can maybe prompt them, asking them if this is still relevant and if they're still working on it, and if not, you can request it to be reassigned. So that's a good practice for issues that already have an assignee. Communicate your progress with the maintainers. Now, this is really important, and it also goes back to the previous point. If you don't communicate your progress well with the maintainers, your issue is also going to appear stale, right? So if you don't talk about your progress, it's going to appear like you're not working on the issue anymore, and it's going to lead to other contributors asking the issue to be reassigned. So if you're stuck somewhere, do drop in a comment on the pull request or the merge request, letting them know that you're still working on it. I'm stuck here. You can, and so most often the maintainers would be happy to even help you. So if you can give them a detailed, explanation of where you're stuck and what's bothering you, they'll probably give you a solution and can even make things faster. Help with pull request reviews. Now that you'll find yourself in situations where you're stuck with a problem and you're not able to move forward, and you've already asked the maintainer some questions and you're waiting for some response. Now, in this situation, a very good way to put use to your time is to go ahead and check out the pull requests which are already open, maybe on that repository or something else. And because maintainers at this point in time can be flooded with a lot of pull requests, and if you can help in reviews, it can take a huge burden off their heads. So please go over the pull requests that have already been raised, and feel free to comment. And there could be some obvious things that you can suggest as well in the pull request. Let's say the indentation is not right, or let's say they're not following some language conventions. And there are these obvious changes that anybody can detect, and you don't really need to be familiar with the project to be able to say that, hey, this code doesn't look right, right? So you can go ahead, find these pull requests, and leave your reviews and help the maintainers, and give and accept feedback constructively. When working in open source on any or in any collaborative environment, there are people who come in from different cultures, different regions, and everybody may not perceive what you say in the way you intended it, right? Maybe it's really common to say that in your language or in your culture, but it might seem very different for somebody coming from somewhere else, right? So always be mindful about of the language that we use on these platforms, and always use neutral and very a neutral stance when communicating, and never take things personally, because sometimes people always have the best intentions, right? Let's always assume we should always go with that assumption that people have the best intentions for us, and we should never get provocated by any other's comments, and we take it in the best interest. Next, be humble. So you could be a really experienced developer, and you see these questions being asked by beginners, and you get frustrated because it's something very simple, right? But you need to understand that you started somewhere as well. There was a time when some maintainer decided to help you, which motivated you to make your first contribution, and you're here today, right? So when you see, let's say, very trivial comments from new contributors, I request you to be patient and help them out. It's going to go a long way, in building their career, and most importantly, learn, because this 1 month is going to be really busy. It's going to have a lot of activity on GitHub, and it's up to you to make the best use of this time, and hopefully make some really meaningful contributions. With that aside, you can already get started. Getting the official Hacktoberfest isn't active yet. It starts on 1st of October, but you can use this time to this period is called Preptember, as you might already know. You can use this time to get familiar with the projects. Maybe you can even shortlist a couple of projects that you intend to work on, and you can start getting familiar with their contributing guidelines, getting familiar with the community, letting maybe heading on to their forums and letting them know that you would be contributing this year, and you can already ask them for resources to get started, and you can start doing your homework basically. And once the event starts officially, you can go ahead and start working on the issues. Now, we as Upright, this is a second year participating. This is a second year as an official sponsor of Hacktoberfest. This is our fourth year participating in Hacktoberfest. So we are back again this year, and we are definitely going to have a lot of issues this time around. They're going to be live soon, so we'll keep you posted through our social media. So if you don't already know what Upright is an open source backend server for building any kind of app that you can imagine. Typically, whenever you need to build, let's say, a mobile app or a web app, you need a backend as well, right? And building a backend can get complicated at times because there's a lot of things involved to get a backend running successfully. There's authentication and databases and security and a lot of things. The list goes on and on. There's usually a diagram that I also share with this, but I don't have it in here today. It basically contains all the moving pieces, all the bits and pieces that go into making such a system work, and it can get overwhelming at times. And if you're a backend developer, you know that from project to project, you'll find yourself writing a lot of boilerplate code over and over again. Upright comes to the rescue here, and it makes all of this really easy by giving you like an out-of-the-box plug-and-play solution, which you can deploy as Docker containers on either your infrastructure or on any cloud provider. Very soon we'll be having the AppWrite Cloud as well, so you don't need to set it up yourself. But even today, the process is extremely simple. It's just a single Docker command, and we have some pre-built images for some popular cloud vendors. So you can take a look, and it doesn't take more than 2 minutes to get started. So AppWrite, some of the highlights of AppWrite is that it's completely open source. Comes with a real-time server which can handle like millions of concurrent connections. And as you go through the list, you'll typically find that you'll find that these are typically things that you need to build your app. For example, if you're building an app, you'll most likely need a place to store all your files. You might need folks to upload their photos or videos and stuff, and you need a place to store them. So AppWrite has this amazing storage API, which comes with a lot of built-in compression and antivirus and security out of the box, which make it very easy for you to store and serve images. And it also comes with a lot of intelligent caching algorithms, which makes it really optimal to serve images through the AppWrite API. AppWrite also supports cross-platform development, which essentially means that as long as your language supports an HTTP library, you can work with AppWrite, because that's all you need. An HTTP client is all you need to work to interact with the AppWrite API and get started. We do have SDKs for a lot of popular languages, but in case it doesn't exist, you can always use the HTTP client to interact with AppWrite. AppWrite also has a really cool authentication API, and the authentication API gives you multiple methods to log in. For example, using emails and password, using magic URLs, using an anonymous sessions, and even using your phone number, right? And very soon we're going to be expanding the kind of login and authentication methods that AppWrite supports. And it's always increasing. It's really cool. I almost forgot about the Oauth providers. We have over 25 different Oauth providers that you can connect to. For example, you want to log in, allow logins through GitHub, allow logins through Google, through Facebook. Everything is possible with AppWrite. And this is also a really good issue to get started with, because we're always on the lookout for new Oauth providers. So if there's a provider that you're looking for, and it doesn't exist in AppWrite, you can get started with that. So I just got a message that I'm over time, so I'm gonna quickly rush through these slides, because these are like fairly simple slides. So we're gonna what are the type of issues that you can contribute to this time around? So we're gonna have obviously some code contributions open. You can contribute by building demo apps for AppWrite. You can contribute by writing blog posts, making tutorials. There are also going to be some low code and non code contributions around designs, designing of assets, and wallpapers or fan art and stuff like that. So keep on the lookout for these details on our Hacktoberfest website. And yes, there are definitely some limited edition swags up for grabs this time as well, and they will be revealed on our website progressively, so you can check that out as well. And with that, can't wait to see what you all create this year. I'm really excited. We'll all be here on our Discord, so you can join our Discord either using the QR code or heading over to appwrite.io/Discord. We're always here to help, and we're excited to see what you create. With that, I'd love to hand it over back to Tessa.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was amazing. This is really great information, and this helps so many different individuals, especially if they are new to Hacktoberfest or if they are even new to contributing in general. This is very helpful. And we have a lot more sessions to help developers and onboard them to open source and onboard them to contributing. And with that, I'll go ahead and thank you again, Christy. I'm going to go ahead and drop you off the stream. I'd like to introduce you to one of the most amazing developers, most amazing individuals in the open source community, Roselle Scarlett, who is a developer advocate at GitHub. I'm going to go ahead and throw you on the stream. Welcome.
Hello. Oh my God, the most amazing. Now I have big shoes to fill, I guess.
Yeah, I think this is the first time I think we've chatted once before, but this feels more official because we're live now. And your microphone sounds amazing. I like the sound quality.
Thank
awesome. You. Yeah, thanks for joining the stream, and let's make sure everything works properly.
Yeah, let me share. Do you see my screen? Just want to make sure.
There it is. Right now you're sharing the, I can see it hidden. You're sharing the StreamYard browser. Okay, now I'm seeing it.
I'm just switching back and forth between tabs because Yeah, but you can see it, right?
Yes, now it's full screen. Perfect.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you so much. All righty. Also, thanks for inviting me to speak. Super excited to be here. And hey, everybody. Also, feel free to let me know if my camera comes off because sometimes it overheats. But yeah. So today we're going to talk about an intro to Git and GitHub. It's going to be very introductory level. And like, if you feel confused with Git and GitHub, like, don't worry, you are not alone. In fact, I think there's so many new terms and technologies to learn in software engineering that it can get super, super confusing. I know when I was in my coding boot camp back in 2018, I had no clue of the difference between words like Java and JavaScript, and I didn't know the difference between Git and GitHub. Like, I literally thought that GitHub was short for Git. When people would be like, you know GitHub? I'd be like, yeah, I know Git. But turns out I figured out years later that Java and JavaScript are not the same, and Git and GitHub are not the same either. And I also want to point out that, like, even if you're starting off and you're confused about something, that doesn't mean you're not going to grow beyond that point. Because, like, who would have thought that someone who doesn't know the difference between Git and GitHub would currently work at GitHub right now? So write that down in your, like, speak it into existence, write down your goals that you want and make it happen. But to introduce myself, my name is Roselle. I'm a developer advocate at GitHub. I've been here for a little bit over a year now. And prior to that, I was a software engineer for about 3 years. I'm an advisor and I was a director at an organization called G Code House, which introduces women of color and non-binary people of color to code. I'm super passionate about empowering people about technology, and I'm also passionate, or some may say addicted, to Twitter. So if you are also on Twitter or other forms of social media, you can go ahead and follow me at BlackRobeBytes. That's my handle on like Twitter, #GitHub dev.2. I'm also on Twitch, but my Twitch name is BlackRobeBytes1 because I got myself locked out of my account because I forgot my password. But anyways, let's go back into Git and GitHub. What is the difference and like why are we using them? And I will start with Git. So Git is a version control system, and your reaction to this may be like, okay, cool, but what's a version control system? And the way I like to describe it is that it's a system that enables you to record snapshots of projects as you save changes throughout your history. So anytime you make a change throughout history, it'll save that, and you save it, it'll record that as a snapshot for you. And here's how I like to illustrate it a little bit so it makes sense why it's needed. This is like a screenshot of part of my Google Drive. And I have like millions, well, not millions, but multiple versions of my resume. So I have Bob Semple Roselle, I have Roselle's resume, I have copy of Bob Semple Roselle resume. And I probably have more now that I changed my name to Scarlett because this was my maiden name. And like, I really can't tell you the difference between this one at the top versus this one at the bottom. And, you know, this happens. I'm sure y'all could relate depending on like switching careers or going through different versions of your life. Like some of these are from high school and early college days. And then some of these are from my software engineering career. And some of these are for like my developer advocate career. But I can't tell you the difference just by looking at these names. It's really hard to keep track of, especially since they're poorly named. And that phenomenon or that situation can kind of happen in code bases as well. Things can have similar names. There's so many different versions of things. And imagine how much harder it is when you're working with so many files and so many different people as well. And I'm going to mute my phone because it's distracting me. But let's keep talking about like the different versions and stuff like that. Because when I was learning to code but wasn't a software engineer, I kind of had a hard time imagining how there would be these different versions of code. So you can have the first version of a code base is the production code base. or the production version. And basically that's what your user is seeing and clicking on. That's what's live, the live website. And then you may have your own local copy where maybe someone reported that a bug happened or that a feature needs to be added. So your copy looks a little bit different than production because you have the fix. And then you may have a version called staging, and that's where all the software engineers on your team push up their code to test that everything works and nothing's broken when all the different fixes are put together. So that's already 3 versions of a code base, and there can still be more. So the thing about it is it's hard, like I said, to manage those all on your own or manually, especially when working with different people. The cool thing is Git, which is using a version control system, is managing those versions for you. It tells you like what the latest version is, who made those specific changes, and why those changes were made. And how do people use Git? Like, commonly it's used in the terminal or command prompt, whether it's called different things, whether you're using a Mac or a Windows. And it's, if you've never seen a terminal or command prompt, it looks like that screenshot right there. And at one point I thought like, wow, this looks really wild. It kind of looks like what I see in movies, like when people are like, I'm hacking into the mainframe. But it's actually not as hard as you think it is. If you sit down and actually read it, it's just plainly telling you what's going on within your computer system. This is a way to interact with your computer without like clicking on different buttons and stuff like that. This is a different interface for you. All right, so now that we kind of have an idea about what Git is, let's talk about what GitHub is. And GitHub is a web-based platform for developers to store their code on the cloud. And I'll break it down a little bit more. Like, what did that even mean? It's just a website, right? It's a website that uses Git to show you all the changes you made to your code, and it's stored on the cloud to make it easier for you to share your code with others. So it enables cross collaboration, and it allows people to see those different changes that are made. I've taken a couple of screenshots of things that are within GitHub. So you have your GitHub profile. You can kind of think of GitHub like a social networking platform sometimes, right? Because you have your profile. It says my name. It says like my little bio. I wrote coding for fun. I have followers and people I'm following. If I want, I can reveal where I work and my email and stuff like that. But most importantly, it has a section for something called repositories. And repositories kind of list out all the different projects that you've created. And each repo, I like to think of it as a project folder or project container for that particular project you made. So here I've created a project called Social Card Generator. And if we click into Social Card Generator, into that repository or repo for short, you'll get to see the different files I've saved here that relate to the project. So I have a git ignore file, a readme file, a JavaScript file called generatesocialimage.js, and I have a package.json. So you don't have to worry about what these files are. You just have to know that repositories hold files within them. And then if you click into a file, you'll get to see more details. You'll get to see the contents of the file. And within this file, I have some really bad code that I wrote it within generatesocialimage.js, and you can see it here, and you can see which line it was written on, etc., etc. The other cool thing is you can see the different changes that were made to your code. These are called commits. These are when those saved snapshots happen within your code base. So you can see that on July 10th, somebody named MT Foley updated the README. Then you can see on July 12th, B. Dougie made a merge pull request. And then you can see on January 4th, I made a fix where it says action will not assign user if another user is assigned. So this is giving context about who made a change, why the change was made, and when it happened. Okay, so I want to let people know there are alternatives to GitHub. GitHub is not the only place where you can store your code and manage the different versions that you have. There are other sites that provide a user interface for version control. It's just that GitHub is one of the most common. And at the time of making this slide deck, there were over 73 million users, but I believe right now there's over 80 million. So here are just some different examples. There's GitLab, there's Bitbucket, there's Gitbucket, there's AWS Code Commit, and then there's SourceForge. And the reason why I bring these up is because once I ended my coding bootcamp or graduated from it, I started a new job, and then they pulled up Bitbucket, and I was like, what is this? I thought we were using GitHub. So just so if you all start a job or you're contributing to a different project that's maybe not on GitHub, like just be aware of that. All right, so how can you store your code on GitHub? What's going to happen is first you got to create a GitHub account on github.com and install Git via your terminal. The next step is so basically this is what it will look like actually. This is like the interface of if you were signing up for a GitHub account on github.com, and then here is like me installing Git on my terminal. Here I'm using Ubuntu. You gotta, like, if you're installing it, look up your operating system and say install Git for Mac, install Git for Windows, and it'll walk you through those instructions. The next thing you want to do is you want to go ahead and create a repository. So in GitHub, you'll see a little plus sign, you'll click new repository, and you'll get to fill out whatever this dialog says. So you'll fill out who the owner is, the name of your repo, give it a little description, decide if you want it to be public or private, and then go ahead and create the repo. On top of that, you want to follow the setup instructions from GitHub. So GitHub will provide you with these different commands that you can copy and paste into your terminal. Now, for a long time, when I was in my coding bootcamp, I had no clue what any of these mean. So I'm going to give you all like line by line what these mean. Maybe some people may say, this is not useful, but I think it is because it's good to understand what you're doing and why. So the first line says echo, and then in quotes, hashtag my first website, and then these little carrots, readme.md. This line is simply creating a readme file with my first website as the title within your repo. And here's the results of that. After that, you'll get to another command that says git init, and that's just initializing that within your local project that you want to start using Git. And here's me in my terminal writing git init, and it was successful. Then after that, you want to do git add, and followed by git add, you want to add the file name. And what you're doing is you're adding or a new or changed file to be pushed up to GitHub. You're like, this is the one that I want GitHub to recognize. Then after that, you want to do git commit -m. And then within the quotes, you want to put a message or a reason of why you changed something. So what git commit is saying is it's saying, I want to save the changes I made, and I want that to be marked within history. And then the -m where you insert a message is where you want to add a note about why you made those changes. And then there's git branch -m. And what you're doing here is basically this is enabling you to name the version of your code, right? Maybe this is your local branch, maybe this is production, maybe this is staging, or maybe this is like a fix that you made. Whatever you want to name it so you can remember what version that is, that's where you'll do that. And then there's another one that says git remote add origin, and it has a URL of the repository. What that's doing is it's connecting your local code that's on your computer to the repository on GitHub. And then last but not least, you'll go ahead and type git push -u origin main. And that pushes all your changes and new files to the GitHub repository. It finalizes everything for you. Now, I want to remind y'all that maybe you're not ready for the terminal, and that is okay. There are other alternatives that you can use to be able to interact with Git and GitHub and get your code on there and be able to contribute to open source. There's GitHub Desktop, there's GitHub's web editor, and then you can also just drag and drop files within GitHub's web UI. I want to double check on the time really quickly because I do want to demonstrate an easy way for you, and I think I have enough time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this website called firsttimersonly.com. You can totally practice this on your own. what I'm going to do is practice a workflow of how you can contribute to an open source project, because it can be a little bit confusing. So they have a practice workflow here. It's the first link called First Contributions, and you're going to go ahead and click on it. And within here, they have a couple of instructions for you to use the terminal. If you feel comfortable with the terminal, you could practice here, but what I'm going to do is show you how to do it without the terminal. So first, I'm going to go ahead and fork this repository. And forking means I'm just making a copy that will exist on my account. And the reason you do this is because GitHub has a limitation, and Git has a limitation where sometimes you can't push to a repository that you don't own. So you have to copy it, own it, and then you'll go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select myself as an owner. The repo name is all good, and I'm just going to click Create Fork. Then after that, a cool thing I can do, and y'all won't be able to really see me do this, but I can open a web editor within my browser by pressing the period button on my keyboard. So I'm going to press period or dot, and it's going to start opening up a GitHub web editor for me. It's opening. So maybe this looks familiar to y'all who've used VS Code before, but basically I have VS Code within my browser. And what I can do is the instructions essentially are telling me to add my name to this contributors.md file. This can be one of your first contributions if you've never made any. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to follow this same flow that everyone's done. So I'm going to do a dash, and I'm going to put my name, Roselle Scarlett, and I'm going to put these parentheses, and I'm going to put my GitHub account, github.com/blackgirlbytes, and I'll save it. Now on this left-hand corner, I'll see a little one icon, and this is where I can use source control or version control without using my terminal. So right here, it's recognizing that I made one change in the contributors.md file. They are completely correct, but first I want to create a new branch, and I'll say create new branch, and says add Roselle to contributions or contributors, something like that. This is my version. I'm going to press switch to branch, and we're almost done, y'all. Almost done. Just waiting for it to finish loading up. Okay, cool. So I made a new branch, and you'll be able to tell that you're on that branch if you look on the left-hand corner. And then after that, I'm going to press add to add this file. I'm saying, yes, I definitely want this to be pushed up to GitHub. And then after that, I'm going to make my commit message and say why I made this change. And then I'm going to say adding Roselle's name to contributor.md. And then after that, I'll click this check mark, and it's being immediately pushed to that branch. So if I go back, let me see really quickly. Oop, I went back too much. If I go back, I'll see that I made a recent push, and I'm going to go back to the first contributions repository. I'm going to go ahead and open a pull request. And the cool thing about this repository is they automatically merge anyone who's correctly followed the rules. So I'm going to see this automatically merged. But in real life, if you're contributing to another project, you may have to wait for the maintainer or somebody to review your code, make the necessary changes, and then merge your code. But I did it. We're good to go here. And if you wanted to practice this on your own, you totally can. I will end by just like doing another little plug for myself. If you like this talk or you want to know more, go ahead and follow me at blackgirlbytes. That's my handle on Twitter, GitHub, dev.to, and like any social media you can think of. Thanks.
Thank you so much. By the way, I really love the design and flow of your slides. I've created so many slide decks in my life, so I can really appreciate it when it's done well.
Thank you. Shout out to Canva.
That's something I haven't used before, but I think I really, really should. I'll post her Twitter account on the chat again. Don't forget to give her a follow. And yeah, thank you so much for taking your time to provide helpful information to first-time contributors, or that's new to open source, or anyone who's new to using Git and GitHub. You'd be surprised with how many community colleges or colleges that do not teach Git and GitHub.
Yeah.
When I replaced one of the instructors at a community college in my local area around 2014, I snuck that in the curriculum, Intro to Git and GitHub.
That's
And
great.
you're not allowed to add anything new to the curriculum without the board of directors approving it. And usually they're really not nice about approving new information. Like it's that at least a year process at a community college for approvals. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to risk my job because this is important and
It's
I care more
important.
about the students.
Yeah, I didn't know it was so hard. That makes so much sense. So I went to a boot camp, but then after that I went to college because I had imposter syndrome. And I was like, I thought we would be learning like more.
Yeah,
And
I respect boot camp so much more because they teach so much more modern technology when it comes to coding. But every school might be different, so I can't really judge it all in a general way. Yeah. So yeah, thank you again for taking your time to be here. And yeah, our next guest is in the waiting room, so I'm going to go ahead and drop you off. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Yes, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye. Awesome. Hello. This is our next guest, John O'Bacon. Welcome to the stream.
Hey, Tessa, how you doing?
I'm doing wonderful. I really love your background. What a clean background. It's real, right?
Yeah. No, it's real. This is where I spend 18 hours of every day sitting in this seat.
Very nice. Yeah, it looks so perfect that it can almost be sold as a Zoom background image.
Thank you. How are you doing? It's been a while since the last time I think I saw you in person was in India, wasn't it? Was that?
It was one of those events. I know you were like a keynote speaker. It was an event around 2015. I did go to an event. Definitely.
Yeah, so it's been a while. Wow.
But you have done so much in your career since then. You've written how many books?
6 so far.
Yeah, you're an expert when it comes to community, which fits very perfect with the whole open source topic. That's open source is all about community and fostering community and growth, and it's such a beautiful thing.
Yeah. No, love it. Well, I appreciate you having me on today. It's nice to see all these. I was going to say, I'm presuming happy smiley faces in the chat as well, which is always fun. So.
Yeah. I'd love to learn more about you. How did you get into open source? What do you do for a living? Just what kind of communities are you involved in? Yeah,
I mean, so I got involved in open source in 1998. My brother Simon was in America, and he came back to live with us for a couple of weeks. And I was complaining about Windows. I was in 1998. I was 19, and my brother said, "Well, why aren't you using Linux?" Which was a bold move back then because Linux was very much unknown and it was very early in its development. And I said, "Okay, I'll give it a go." And he didn't dual boot me. He basically installed Slackware 96 on my computer, left a Post-it note on the screen with the username and password, and then left. So I worked in a bookshop at the time, and I bought a book called Slackware Unleashed, which I actually have still over there, and kind of got started using it. And in that first chapter, it talked about how people all over the world came together to build this software, and I was just mesmerized by it. It sounds like a horrible cliche, but really a light bulb went off. And back then, of course, certainly in England, the internet was not very common for most people. Like in the US, people had like free local dialing, so you could get online relatively affordably. Back then you had to pay 10 pence a minute to get online. So I was very limited in how much time I had online. So the idea of people coming together to build software was just unbelievably interesting to me, and literally just started a career. I never realized I'd ever do anything like this. So.
Yeah, you definitely started a long time before me when it comes to open source, but with computers, I started probably in the mid 90s. My dad was into software engineering as a hobby, but
Cool.
was a networking engineer. So every 2 years, he built a new computer, and he's like, "You're going to have to stand there and watch me put this together. I want you to understand everything about computer hardware. I want you to understand how a computer works, because this is what the future is going to be. The future is computers. People don't know that yet, but this is what it is." So
That's awesome. Your dad, some
Thank goodness.
serious foresight right there. What was your first computer?
I think it was maybe a Macintosh. It was a huge, bulky computer.
Right.
And my dad came home one day in 1994 with a big garbage bag full of maybe 200 or 300 copied games. And he's like,
Right.
"Well, my friend gave me this, so if you want to play some games, here they are. You have enough for the rest of your life."
That's
Like
incredible.
little floppy disks.
And it's incredible to remember, like back then it was, without sound like old people, back then, of course, it was getting software. Yeah, you had to get it on floppies or cassette tapes or whatever. Like a bag of games is like a dream come true.
I got hooked on chess 3D. No, it was not 3D chess. There was a chess game, and then there was this like cave game of
Good
monsters.
times.
It's too long ago for me to remember. And then every time I'd see him on the computer, he'd be like writing code. Like, "What are you doing? What are you building?" He's like, "Oh, I'm just like learning stuff. I'm just doing this for fun." So I think it was BASIC or one of those first old languages.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah, and with open source, like I think I was at an open source I was at a like a CMS conference in 2011, and someone came up to me and said, "Hey, like we're looking for contributors to our open source project. Do you want to join?" I'm like, "What? Open source? What's that?" Like, this is an open source project conference. Like, "Oh, okay." Well, I didn't kind of put it 2 and 2 together, and they're like, "Oh, well, my parents raised me to say, like, don't ever say no to all opportunities. Just be open-minded to seeing like what it is, and at least take the time to listen." So I'm like, okay. I emailed them and learned more about the opportunity, and I'm like, "Oh, work for free? Okay. Yeah, why not? Why not? I need to learn and gain more experience." And that just contributing to open source, like I've learned so much. And I think the biggest skill I got from contributing to open source is it's actually not on the technical side. It's on the soft skills side. Because my communication skills wasn't so great over those years. And whenever someone would correct me, "Hey, you should respond in this way instead," or "That way was kind of disrespectful," or "What you said was kind of rude," or "What you said was kind of offending. You should kind of, rethink what you're saying." And I love it when people like, message me in private and bring these things up to me, because I can't improve. You don't know what you're saying until someone brings it up. So
that's such a good attitude. I have a very similar way of looking at it as well, which is one of my biggest fears in life is that I'm doing something wrong and people are afraid to tell me. And I know that won't be because I'm aggressive or anything like that, just because they don't want to upset me. And it's like, the thing I love is that when you do something wrong, when you fail, there's a body on the ground. You can look at it, you can investigate it, you can see what's going on, and it helps you to get better. I think if you got that kind of attitude, which is good. One of the things I love about open source as well, I don't know how many people who are watching here, maybe they can message in the chat if this is the case, are new to open source. But, I remember because I got into it when I was 19, and it was that, I was about to go to university. I'd taken a year off, and I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. And most of my friends were like, "Oh, this is going to be my career." And I knew I wasn't smart enough to be a developer. I didn't have the confidence to be a full-time musician, which was my other thing. So I just didn't know what I wanted to do. And in retrospect, realizing that I think this is what's so magical about open source is that you can build a career, you can build experience without having to go and get a job. That you can join a project, you can be a developer, but you can go and help out with community management. You can write documentation, you can do design, you can translate software. There's a million things that you can do. if you put the work in, and that can build a resume, can build a CV. Whereas in the vast majority of industries, the only way to do that is you've got to basically talk your way into a job or have a degree or something, and someone give you a shot so you can start building out your LinkedIn profile with your experience. And I love that you don't have to do that as much in open source. And I wish someone had told me that back then, because it generated enormous amounts of anxiety for me. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And it's kind of isolating when you don't know what you want to do and everybody else does know what they want to do. I'm like, am I some kind of weirdo? I mean, probably yes, but
yeah. And 2011 was the year I was looking for my first software engineering job, like a junior level. And I applied to probably hundreds and hundreds of jobs. And every single response was like, is this a joke? Like, are you serious? Right. You're not even anywhere, like you have zero experience. I've taken the time to like build a bunch of different projects. I just started reaching out to everyone. Anyone want a free website? I'll build you something for free. Just tell me what you're looking for. Oh, you need a website to sell the items that you've been making at home. Like, I'll make that for you, just whatever. And then I started building that as my portfolio. And that was like all I had to work with. And I just got really lucky with one company who their tech test, like all the tech test was just so beyond my level and so difficult. But this one was like, I want you to read our current code and tell me what it's doing. And my strengths were understanding existing code, and my weakness is building code from scratch. Like, oh, I need you to build this as like a tech test. So thank goodness, like I didn't have any open source experience, or I didn't have any contributions to make my resume look fancy. All I had was just a few projects.
You're the perfect developer. Like a developer who actually wants to read other people's code. It seems to be a relatively rare kind of creature.
Easier which makes debugging really easy when I can just like really understand and troubleshoot.
Yeah.
What was your journey? Like what did you start? Did you start as like a musician, or like what was your like first jobs, and how did it progress to where it is now?
I'm one of the, when I think of my background, I think that I'm very lucky, but I also think that I work my ass off. I think it's, like there's this kind of trope out there that everybody just talks about how lucky they were. And I think luck is a huge amount of it, but I think a lot of people who are doing what they want to do, they work for it. Right. And, when I was at university, part of the reason why I feel very lucky is that back in the late 90s, early 2000s, like England was just a really great place to be for open source. There was a lot of activity, a lot of people interested in it. And I don't really know why. And because we're a relatively small country, you didn't have to travel very far to know everybody. So when I was at university, I was really getting into open source. It was the environment that I needed. I set up a Linux user group in my local town that I was living in. Started getting to know some people, and I set up a website called linuxuk.co.uk, which there wasn't really a community for open source people that wasn't on Usenet. Ironically, my first version of that website was built in Microsoft Front Page. That was my dirty little secret. So people would, I'd meet people, at like Linux user group meetings. There was an event in the UK called the Linux Expo in London. And I got quite drunk in a bar one night with these two guys, Richard Drummond and Nick Veitch, who were starting a magazine called Linux Format Magazine. And I said to them, can I write an article for you? And they said, yes, but if it's rubbish, we won't publish it. That seemed like a fairly reasonable contract. So I wrote it and they published it. And then I carried on writing. And then when university finished in 2003, I thought to myself, I'm just going to keep writing articles, and not entrepreneurial really at all in a formal sense. I didn't realize I was really starting my own business. I had no idea about, gross profit margin or anything like that. I just kept doing it. And then I wrote an article about an organization that's set up in my local town called Birmingham called Open Advantage. And again, this is the luck piece, which is they'd raised £4.5 million from the government to invest in helping companies from our region, the West Midlands, to use open source, which was really early back then. And I wrote an article about it, and I thought it was super cool. And they offered me a job.
Wow.
And, you know, and I'll always remember this because I couldn't believe how much they were going to pay me to do what I would have loved, what was my dream job. They were going to pay me £31,000 a year, which was exponential amounts of cash for me back then. And I get to basically help people using open source. And that's really when I started doing consulting, because I had to learn about like what people want and all the rest of it. So I was there, but it was a 3-year project. So at some point it was going to run out. And towards the end of that 3 years, that's when I started getting a little bit itchy feet about, well, what am I going to do next? And that was, again, luck, where this was the beginning of the Ubuntu project. And I'd already met Mark Shuttleworth, who ran Ubuntu, a couple of times at some events that I ran. And I emailed him and I said, you know, you got this Ubuntu community manager job. Do you think I might, like, I'd like to apply for it? And he says, I don't think it's for you. I was like, oh, that's a vote of confidence. So I thought, I'm going to apply for it anyway, and got the job. And, you know, yeah.
There's always people in your life that'll say, like, this is not something you'll ever be able to do. This is not for you. You don't really fit that. I always ignore those people.
Yeah, it was. And it's funny because when I worked there, I would joke about, and I was there for 7 years, and it was unbelievable because, you know, whenever anyone new joined the company, a new department, you'd work for him directly. So I worked for him for about 1.5 years, and then I went to work for the CTO, and I was working on the Ubuntu engineering management team. So I was working with engineering managers. And this is when people say, like, where should community management or DevRel report into? For tech companies, I always say it should be in engineering, because for me, being with the engineering managers for camaraderie and just learning about how software was built back then was unbelievably helpful. You know, and then I was kind of getting about 7 years, and I was getting a little bit bored with Ubuntu. You know, I felt like I'd done everything I could do there, and that's when I went to X Prize, which, you know, had these big incentive competitions. You know, the first prize I worked on was a $15 million competition, primarily funded by Elon Musk back then, which challenged teams to build an Android app for tablets where kids could learn how to read, write, and do arithmetic within 18 months without the aid of a teacher. And it was designed for the, like, you know, 150 million kids in, you know, places like rural Africa who didn't have any access to education, so they could actually help them to get an education. It was a really rewarding place to work. But I missed the open source element. That's when I realized, I think sometimes you got to go away from something to appreciate it. That, you know, there was a lot of talking and design and strategy at X Prize, but I missed being in the trenches with people who were writing software, who were iterating on software, who were translating software, whatever else. And that's when I went back to open source and went to GitHub. And I was there for a bit, and I realized I like working with lots of people. That's what I learned at X Prize. I worked with so many different companies and people. It was a really bonkers environment, and that's when I started consulting. So,
how long have you been consulting for? And I know you do a lot of writing. I've subscribed to your community newsletter so long ago, and it's one of the very few things that I have not unsubscribed to, because there's just so much value in your writing, and you write for yourself, and you write for just to provide value to everyone.
I appreciate that.
Thing.
Yeah, I've been, this year will be, I think this year is my 6-year anniversary doing consulting full time. I did it, I started doing it on the side back in 2008, 2009, because I wrote my first community book, The Art of Community, back then. A large bank reached out to me and said, hey, could we hire you to come and help us put some of the stuff in your book into practice? And I had no idea how to talk to companies like that. So I did it, and just did it on the side to earn some money, but I didn't have a lot of time to do it. And my wife and I, honestly, we were petrified that if there was going to be enough business out there when I started doing it full time. And, you know, I've been very fortunate because I've been fully booked pretty much since I started. But yeah, I love it. And I just love the diversity of working with lots of people and learning about different problems and learning how to build a business as well. So
I'm sure the first question that companies ask is, okay, how do we build a community? How do we start? Like, tell us now.
Yeah.
Do you have like a set of questions you start asking them? Like, okay, what are your personas? Like, who is your community now?
Yeah. When I started out, it was I was definitely on the more aspirational side of things. Like the thing I love about what I do and what so many of us do when we build out communities is I think there's something so pure and beautiful about getting people together. Right. So my view is, let's say, for the sake of argument, let's say we've got 100 people watching this right now, that live or in the stream or the recording or whatever. That's 100 different brains, each of which has got experience and expertise and talents and has learned some things that have worked and some things that haven't worked. Everybody comes from a different background, different way of looking at the world. And I think when we get all of that out into a shared setting and we can all consume that, I think it's the most incredible way of harnessing the gifts that we all have. I think in the earlier days, my primary focus was when I figure out the recipe for doing this and I tell people the recipe, then they can do it. But what consulting really taught me was it's not just knowing how to do it. It's also creating an environment where people are set up to be successful because their intrinsic motivations and rewards are aligned with building a community. So when I start out now with clients, or I have something called the Community Experience Masterclass, which is where I do a group coaching as well. I always, first of all, set the expectation that most communities fail, and it's going to take, you have to work your ass off. It's going to take some work to do it. But to me, the lens that I want to understand from my clients or from my students is I want to make sure that they see the potential and see the opportunity, because I think if they know it's important to them, then they'll do it. I think there's been a lot of folks who I've worked with in the past where they like the idea of a community, but they don't necessarily understand how much work it requires. So therefore, when they actually start to roll their sleeves up, they can't do it, and they don't do it. So one of the first things I ask them is like, tell me what you see as the potential here. And if I hear the right kind of keywords and the right statements, then I'm excited about it. I think there is a whole category creation side of this. I think we're in the world right now, in my mind, where I feel like I've generally figured out the recipe of how to build communities, and now I'm being able to interface it with lots of different types of people. Like, I don't just work with tech companies. I'm running my Community Experience Masterclass right now. And for example, one person in my class is setting up a community for pet lovers. And I've got a pharmaceuticals company who's been through it. And I love that because these are different people from different backgrounds and perspectives. How do we figure out how to apply it there? So to me, what I always want to get a sense of is their expectation accurate? And frankly, do they have a product or a service that works? Because if your product sucks, it's going to be difficult to build a community. So
you mentioned incentivizing in a community. Is there such thing as over incentivizing to the point where people only wants to be part of it because of the incentives and prizes and stuff like that? It's like it's easy to kind of like do too much.
Yeah, 100%. There's actually something, I think it's called the Yurks Dodson model. Looks a little bit like this.
Oh, I'm going to have to write those words down.
And what this is it kind of looks like this, which is where like, this is essentially kind of like how much people are contributing, right? So this is contribute, and this is reward, right? So what happens is, when people start contributing, you start giving them things. Like this might be, kind of some recognition, and this might be a gift card and things like that. And as you kind of go up to it, people start getting more and more things. So, by the time you get up here, this is like the top of what you can offer them. So for a lot of companies, this might be flying them out to your event or things like that. And the problem is that a lot of people, when they get to this stage up here, they're so used to getting really nice things that their motivations are incorrectly aligned. They're in it for the rewards as opposed to in it for the contribution. And there are some exceptions to this, but this was actually a study that was done that it had something to do with sexual arousal. I think it was. I forget what it was. Something to do with that, but it was very easily mappable to psychological rewards. So what I like to do is, like, instead of having it go up like that, is you have it go up more like this. So you don't offer as many rewards, but what you do is if you lower the curve, flatten the curve, everyone, then basically you lower the risk of people just being in it for the rewards.
I like that a lot. That's definitely helpful. Stephen in the chat, he was one of our our top contributors and community members at Appright, and we actually just recently hired him as a software engineer. And
Cool.
a lot of our engineers we bring in from our open source contributing community. But he said a funny statement. I initially joined Appright for the prizes.
Yeah.
But it's something
Yeah.
we do often, and we're always trying to make it fun. We do raffles, meme contests, all sorts of contests. And
Love it.
and it's hard to know if we're doing too much or we're doing too little. And, just there's a lot of thinking behind that. And I know there's like so many different open source communities that run into the same issue. Like, how do we keep our community interesting? How do we keep the growth to continue? How do we advocate to other individuals to talk about our open source project?
Yeah.
So,
my kind of take on this is any kind of reward is basically validating a behavior. So if let's say we're talking about Appright, and you basically either through what I would call a submarine reward, which is a surprise reward, or the stated reward where you tell them what you're going to give them if they do something. If it triggers the behaviors that you want to see, then to me, the incentives and the rewards are working great, because that's what we want. The fear that I have with people who incorrectly apply rewards is when you're triggering the wrong behavior. So back in the early days of community, many folks may remember this. I'm sure you'll remember this as well, Tessa. In the early days of forums, people would say, when you've posted 50 times, you'll get this badge, or you'll get this thing. Or when you've posted 150 times, you'll get this. And the problem is that was incentivizing quantity over quality. So you used to get a lot of garbage in communities, in forums. So to me, I always look at, okay, well, the thing that I love to recognize and reward are firsts. Like the first time somebody answers a question, the first time somebody posts a piece of content, the first time somebody speaks at your event, the first time somebody, hosts a webinar, whatever it might be. I love that as a kind of a model. But to me, it all comes down to, if your community has people who feel entitled in it, then something's broken. And if your rewards are incentivizing the wrong things, the wrong behaviors, then something's broken. And a lot of companies, a lot of communities, because I do quite a bit of work with nonprofits as well, is they're like, well, we don't have money to send people T-shirts and cool gifts and whatever else. And to me, the most important reward that anybody wants is validation. I think most people in the world, I'm sure every single person, including myself on this stream, is included in this. Like, we all want to know we're on the right track. And especially if you work for a company, you want to know that your boss is happy, that your colleagues are happy, that your community's happy, that you're doing good work, that you feel a sense of belonging and appreciation. And most people, I would argue, certainly managers, suck at that. They don't give anywhere near enough validation to their team members. And I think the same thing with communities. So when somebody does something cool, even just dropping them a note and saying, thanks, we really appreciate that. It's people like you who make our community special. I think that's more important than any T-shirt that anyone gets. So to me, like, a lot of communities who don't have any money, a lot of companies have a very limited budget. You can actually do a lot with just recognition and thank yous.
Yeah, and I can relate to this. I think I spent maybe 20 hours a week contributing with the Joomla project for like 5 or 6 years straight. I have no idea why I worked for free for so many hours for so long, but it was just the power of community is amazing. Like, I just felt like they became a family to me, and I just couldn't think of a day without being part of the project in some way. It was just like really tied into the community. And
I think that was, by the way, that's where we met, was in India. It was at the Joomla conference.
Yes.
That's where it was. Yeah, I was trying to think of what it was. That's it. That was such a fun event. So
yeah, and I remember presenting there too. So I think we were both one of the speakers.
We were, that's right, yeah.
And like, if they just sent me swag, like, I don't think that would be so exciting to me because of the amount of work I'm putting in. It's not like something, once in a while here and there. But like, sometimes they'll write an article and mention me and about the work I'm doing, or they'll mention me on social media, or they'll reach out and say thank you, or like they start mentioning the things that I'm working on. And there's like no feeling that's greater than being appreciated for the time that you're putting in. It's such a big deal.
I could not agree more. And it's like, and I think this actually applies here as well. Like, I mean, you're very accomplished in your career. And I think one of the things that sometimes people forget as well is that, you know, whether it's somebody who's very accomplished in their career, they've been doing it for a long time, or whether it's somebody who's been very, very active and very well respected in the community, even the seemingly the most accomplished, successful people still need that. You know, like I know a bunch of CEOs who I work with who are the most insecure people on the planet, right? And they're CEOs of like successful companies. Everybody needs that validation. I don't think it's just for people who are getting started, right?
Oh, completely agree. Yeah, it's okay to reach out to your bosses and thank them.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and thinking of things in an opposite perspective. If you're in an open source community and somebody's contributing something, maybe they're doing it incorrectly, be very kind and respectful. They're volunteering. They're taking their free time out of their family time to try to make an impact, to try to make a difference. And their intentions they're not trying to do anything incorrect on purpose. They're trying to be helpful. So be respectful and kind and talk to them like you want others to speak to you. I've seen contributors quit contributing because of the way people have responded to them on a GitHub issue, saying, you're like, are you dumb? You're doing this wrong. Like, did you even read the contributing guide? Like, you've been a contributor for a long time and you're a part of the core team and you're speaking to new contributors like this. Like,
hey, it's so rude, isn't it?
I was so mad.
It drives me crazy when that happens. And, you know, even just outside of open source, I find it really disheartening when you see the way people treat each other on, you know, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and all the rest of it. Like, my view is really simple on this is, you know, we're in this kind of culture right now where people just want to immediately dig their heels into their side and just attack other people that disagree with them, or that they picture in their heads as the boogeyman or the boogie woman. And in my mind, I always like look at intention. Like, what is the intention of this individual? So if you've got a contributor who's new at the project and they're doing the best that they can, you know, clearly their intentions are honorable. Like, if they're actually trying to contribute, and therefore they deserve courtesy and respect. We had this one guy who will obviously remain nameless when I was at Canonical, who was just stepping on every possible plank you can imagine in trying to get started with Ubuntu. Like, he was making every conceivable mistake you can imagine. And my team was starting to get a little bit annoyed with him. It's not just me saying it to my team, but we'd say it to each other, like, let's just remember he's new at this. And importantly as well, English was not his first language. If I remember correctly, I think he lived in Nigeria. I forget where he lived. I think it was Nigeria. And he just didn't, you know, I got to know him a little bit, and you know, his story was fascinating. Like, he came from a very different background. He didn't grow up around computers. He didn't grow up around, you know, books where he could learn about computers. He kind of got into it very recently. So he was kind of building the car while he was driving it. And he got there in the end, and he became a very active member of the community. But I think with just a little bit of patience, but I would even extend that further where, you know, like, people who just eviscerate each other on Twitter, it's like, well, look at the intention. You can tell when someone is being like a horrible individual, and we shouldn't ever accommodate those people. But like, I think I'm generally the view that most people in the world are generally decent human beings. But I think a lot of decent human beings are kind of getting eviscerated unnecessarily because we immediately jump to judgment. So look at the intention first.
No, that's such a big deal to me, is just advocating respect in an open source community and offering to mentor and you know, if someone wants to get involved, we should be reaching out. We should be talking to them and you know, seeing how they want to contribute, see how they want to help. How do you think open source makes like such an impact in this society? Like, why is open source such an important topic? Like, for someone who's like still new to what open source is, it's still kind of mind blowing. Like, just trying to make sense of like, why free software over paid software? Why does it matter?
I think for me, there's a number of tangible and intangible reasons that make it pretty magical, you know. So I'm going to try and be brief on this, because this is something I could talk about for like an hour, and, you know, just because I enjoy talking about it. One of the things I love about open source is, and one of the things I love about what I do specifically, just my own life experience, is I get to work with like really different people, you know. So, you know, I'm working with, for example, you know, CEOs and founders of companies and things like that, who are operating in a very different world to, you know, for example, as a great example, like when we were at the Joomla conference in India, what gives me so many fond memories about that event was not just being in India and all the rest of it, but it was hanging out with the people there, like super down to earth engineers, developers who just love what they're doing, who are really passionate about software. And I love that these two different worlds exist, and these two different worlds massively benefit from open source. So to me, like in the business world, there is like real genuine value in like in building out your stack, and then maybe you create the bit of software that sits on the top of it. So you can do a lot more with open source than you could ever do with proprietary software. And the inclusion that affords for like small companies, different companies in different parts of the world. It doesn't mean that Silicon Valley, Berlin, and London are the only places, and Tel Aviv are the only places where you can build great companies. So I love the fact that open source enables that. But to me, what I really love about it as well is that we all can get a start in it. That you don't have to go to some fancy university and get a computer science degree. Is that if you've got enthusiasm and energy, and you've got access to the internet, the opportunity is there, and everybody comes from a different starting position, but everybody's got an opportunity to participate. And what I love about it is that the feedback loop is built into it. Is that, you know, the first time you create a piece of code, it's gonna suck. Anything worth working for is hard to do, but the feedback loop is built into it. And not only in doing that do you build your skills and your expertise and all the rest of it, and you build like genuinely useful skills that are relevant in the market. Like you can go and get a job and earn a living and support a family doing that. But also you make so many cool friends doing it. Like to me, it is the most impactful thing I've ever had in my life. And you know, it's easy to kind of get into the mindset of, well, it was so much more intimate and different when I was starting out compared to how it is today. I think that's nonsense. I think, you know, a 16-year-old, 17-year-old young person who's just getting started, you know, maybe they're at school and they're excited about, you know, Blender or whatever it might be. It's as exciting, and all that dopamine, it feels the same as it did when I got started and when you got started, Tess, and when other people got started on this. And that to me is what's so magical about it. And I think especially from a community perspective, it took me years to realize how weird it is in open source, because a lot of people think of open source communities, if you've grown up in it, as like, well, this is how we build communities. You have community councils and technical steering committees, and you have codes of conduct, and you have forums and channels and all this kind of stuff. It's super weird compared to how the rest of the world builds communities, because we have a tangible asset that we can exchange digitally. Like if you create an open source project and I think it's cool, I can download the code, I can make a change, and I can submit it to you, and we can live in completely different parts of the world. And that's really cool. You can't do that for people who want to have a community around, you know, making guitars, right? Because you can't exchange, you know, the tools that a luthier would use digitally. And I think that's one of the reasons why open source has been so profound, is that it ticks all the boxes in the business world. It ticks all the boxes in the learning and education world. It ticks the boxes in the relationships world. And I think that's what's so cool about it.
And they can all work together to really improve the software. If there's something you don't like about it, we can change it. It's a beautiful thing.
Exactly. And like, one, you know, it's like the best possible deal, right? Is that like one person makes a contribution, and if there's 10 people in the community and they all make a contribution, then for your one contribution, you get 10 contributions. Yeah, it's all, I'm as excited about it as I've ever been. I love it. it's much more normal now. Like it's part and parcel. Like it's part of how we build software. It's the main way in which we build software now. But it's still super cool.
I was on a Twitter space recently, and people were sharing like different, like their favorite things about being in an open source community. And one individual brought up something that I never really thought of before, is how people communicate in different cultures, and that saying things in a specific way can be like significantly offending to someone in a certain culture. And you get to like really learn how to communicate more effectively without being offending at all to anyone, and being more selective and careful with word usage.
I
it's
totally
something
agree.
that I'm like thinking about constantly now.
Yeah, it's interesting. The example I always like to use with this is, I'm English, and I've been living in America now. Next year will be my 15-year anniversary of living in America, and I'm married to an American woman, and I've got an American son. So I'm basically American at this point. And moving from the UK to California specifically was interesting because there's a lot more sarcasm where I come from, a different type of sarcasm than where I live. And I used to date an Israeli woman, and she was part Israeli, part Northern English. And one of the things, this obviously, it's people, it's easy to get attacked for saying something like this. This does not obviously apply in all situations, but as a general rule, one of the things I love about working with Israelis is they're super direct. And people talk about this all the time. Like Israelis, they don't beat around the bush. They get right to it. And I love that about Israelis. But what I also love about Californians is Californians are, very, very laid back in many ways. And there's a lot, there's an abundance of kindness in California. So one of the things I love about it, you just get these common trends in different parts of the world. And to your point, Tessa, like you get to work with all these different types of people. So you get to learn them. And I think so long as we look at these consistencies in a positive light, and we don't, push people away, and we don't judge people in a negative way by looking at consistencies, because that's just mean, then it's super cool, like getting to know all these different types of people.
I absolutely love it. I was actually in Israel just recently for my third time being there. And I really like the culture. And you mentioned that they're very direct. And it reminded me of a situation where I'm like, what do I say to prevent someone from bumping into me? And she said, you say move in Hebrew. And I was like practicing the word, but I'm like, that just feels so mean, like telling someone to move when I walk by them. Like imagine in the US, like you're about to bump into someone, you're like, move. They're going to turn around and say, excuse me, what did you say to me? Come back in my face and tell me that. At least in Seattle is like that. And Seattle isn't the friendliest city in the US. I've learned there's a lot more friendly areas after my family recently moved to Texas. And I've been learning that culture. It's like it's like its own country in Texas.
The US is like, it's a big chunk of my family live in Montana, and we go to Montana for the 4th of July every year. And it's like a totally different, like the last 4th of July, we were hanging out in a barn. We had a barn party. We went to a barn party. It's like, it doesn't happen around here. And I love it. Like, there's just a different lifestyle in different parts of the world. So.
Someone stopped. I was in Walmart shopping. Someone stopped and said, hey, how's your day going today? I'm like, excuse me, do I know you? I'm like, oh no, the Seattle's coming out of me. Oh no, I was just asking how your day. I was just saying hello. It's a random stranger.
I love that.
Why can't we all be like this in the whole world? So back to advocacy, like what are ways someone can become an open source advocate if they're new to open source and it's something that they just are newly, like they're just passionate about this topic and want to get more involved and want to talk about to other people? Is there things that they can do to help promote open source?
Yeah, I mean, to me, like I think you can't be an advocate unless your brain is just sizzling about something, unless you're just really excited about something. And I would say, like, find your love is the thing, and in many cases that will be either a project or it will be a vertical or a type of project, right? So you might be excited about, containerization, or you might be excited about 3D graphics, or you might be excited about music, whatever. And just go and find the thing that you're excited about. I just start there by find something that you really, and don't convince yourself to be excited. Don't think, well, it seems like Kubernetes is something everybody's talking about. I should probably be really excited about it. If you're not really excited about it, you're more interested in Blender, for example. So I think that will be the first thing I would recommend. The second thing I would recommend is advocacy kind of drives me a little bit crazy, because I feel like some, certainly not all advocates, are just unbelievably talented people who just scratch off one part of the scratch card, where there's a lot of focus on blogging and speaking at events and things like that. And to me, what I want to see more in the advocacy world is people building the journey, right? Like in the marketing world, people talk about funnels, right? Where, let's say you run a webinar, and many people will be familiar, I'm sure you know all about this, Tessa, as well. You go and run a bunch of ads for your webinar, and that points to a landing page, and people sign up with their first name and their email address, and then they get a confirmation, and then they start getting emails through your webinar, and then you do the webinar, and then you follow up after the webinar, and it's a funnel of these different things. And I want to see more of that in how people build advocacy around communities. Like the very first time somebody comes into a project, or the first time they start using your software, what does that journey look like? And talking about generalizations, a lot of developers struggle to kind of design that user journey, because developers often think in a architectural, structural way. That's how they build software. And I think one of the reasons why advocates and marketing people are so important in this world is because a lot of people, marketers and advocates, are by definition highly empathetic people, and they look at the world through the lens of other people's experiences. So when they come into your new project or use your software for the first time, what's it like? What are the things that they're going to stumble over, right? And I would recommend that if you're new to advocacy, or even if you're doing advocacy right now, a way to kind of become the best that you can be in advocacy is to really focus on that journey, is to put your brain into like Chrome incognito mode and look at it through somebody else's experience and say, like, well, what are they going to do? One of the first times I experienced this was probably about 8 years ago. I got really into smoking barbecue. Like I was smoking briskets and ribs and stuff like that. And I loved the science of it. It was super interesting. But then I made
That's one of my hobbies. Keep going.
It is?
Yes.
Oh, this is exciting.
Smoking meat. Brisket I love the science behind every single item.
It's super interesting. Yeah, it really is, like, I think for the nerds among us, it's really fascinating. But I made the mistake that I think a lot of people make, is that for me, like, it was, okay, I'm learning about, different smokers and how to start a fire and charcoal versus wood and this, that, and the other. And I loved being outside, away from a computer, just me and fire and flavor. But then, everybody says, oh, you need to write your cooks down and you need to track everything. I was like, well, I'm not going to use a piece of paper and a pen. So I started building an application called Barbecue Pad, using Django, and started building this application. And then I now spent more time building this software than actually smoking. And the first time I built it, I got like 4 or 5 people to walk through how they used it. And it was a total disaster. Like all of my assumptions were incorrect. And that's when I realized, the way in which you think people are going to enter into your world and the way in which they actually do are totally different. And that's why I think people who can see and design that journey win in advocacy, because they're able to look at it through that lens. So that's the main thing I would definitely recommend. Speaking of conferences and blogging, all that stuff is super important. But to me, if you do all that outreach stuff and then people come in and it's really confusing to get started, then you've done the traffic, you've gotten the traffic, but you've not got them through to that first step of the journey.
Yeah, and keeping the analogy with like smoking barbecue, the problem with smoking barbecue is like there's no perfect how-to guide, because there's like 50 variations to get the same result for one way. And when looking up tutorials, I'm like reading, it's done this way. No, it's done this way. And then I get confused because there's like 15 different ways to get started, but I'm not sure, but trying different ones. Oh, this is too complex. Why is this so difficult? And then, which one is the easiest one? It'd be nice to know, like, oh, if you're brand new and new to this, or you're a new developer, there's a lot of different methods. This is the best process for you. And tutorials don't really like do that. They don't really understand who you are. They're just kind of going off with what they know and their knowledge.
Yeah, I agree with you. The other thing that I don't like about tutorials, most of them, is that they're effort-based. You know, they basically show you how to construct your effort in a certain way. They're like, oh, we're going to show you how to, you know, build your first Python application. And it requires massive amounts of effort, usually for some pretty uninteresting outcome. Like, Hello World to me is the worst example of this, or the best example of the worst case scenario here is, who gives a crap about printing Hello World on their screen? I want to do something meaningful, and I'd much rather put more effort in and get something meaningful where I can be excited about the result. And that's why my view with tutorials is like, just focus on a quick win. Just get someone to something of meaningful value, but if it's not valuable to them, they won't do it. You know, I think a lot of kids, I saw this with my son, like showed him like Hello World when he was, 7, and he was like, cool. Why do I care about that? But now he's building like his own little website for like, him and his buddies have got like a trash collection team that they're doing at school. They set it up themselves, and he's building a website for them. So now it's meaningful. So
that's really nice. I wish my teenagers were interested in that. The only programming they're interested in is if it's related to hacking or manipulating hacks and mods for their video games.
Yeah, like Minecraft mods and stuff like that. Yeah.
And I can't be mad because I'm just as guilty as that in my early 20s, and they're doing that in their teens, and that's such a big deal. Like they're going to gain a skill out of that, even though it's like not the best thing for them to do, because I don't know what they should and shouldn't be doing when it comes to hacking. I'm like, as long as it's not on my IP address, let me introduce you to a VPN. That's another story.
Doesn't want to get arrested in the middle of the night by the FBI.
Who's the person responsible for hacking our system? This child over here? No, mom did it. Mom did it.
Right.
But yeah, and it's going to definitely be useful in their future, because they're going to recognize code a lot. Yeah, for sure. Do you know, like, what is like a good, like, someone asked, like, oh, I'm looking for resources on open source or learning more about open source software. What do you usually recommend? Is there like a list of resources? Is there a one-stop, everything is there resources list?
So I think we can probably break this into two pieces. I think when people are getting started with anything, I think there's like resources for how you learn. And I think we're in this very fortunate position of we have an abundance of resources, right? There's thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of help on the internet and videos and whatever else where you can do it. To me, it's sifting through all of that and finding what works right for you. And my view is the best possible scenario in any learning experience is that somebody is helping to coach you. You know, it's one of the reasons why, like, I used to make like pre-recorded training, and I moved away from that to kind of, one-on-one consulting, but also like group coaching, because I think people feel like they need to be along with the, like, they need someone to help them along with the journey. So one of the things I would recommend is I think finding like how to get started with open source. To me, the best place to start is going to be YouTube, because I think YouTube videos are just much more engaging than a lot of written document. I mean, it depends on how you learn. I'd start there. And what I'd recommend everybody does is start with some kind of outcome. Like give yourself a goal. And if you can find somebody to help you with that goal, that's great. So let's say you think, okay, well, I want I want to make a contribution to open source. So first of all, I'd find a project that you love, that you're excited about. And then I'd pick a piece of low-hanging fruit in that project. And it might not be in the code base itself. It might be something else. So for example, it could be maybe you write an article for them, or maybe you organize a local group. You do something that's relevant to that project. And I'd pick that goal. But this to me is the most important thing, is progress over perfection. I was guilty of this when I was younger. And when I started out, that I wanted everything to be perfect. And I didn't want to look like an idiot in this new community that I'm a member of. I had these horrible visions of, I'm going to do something wrong, and then they're going to think I'm stupid, and then they're not going to let me participate. It literally never works out that way. I think just do something. And I think when you submit your thing, let's say you're submitting code, and you say, look, this is my first time. I'm sure I've made some mistakes here. I'm really open to feedback. The way I like to say it is, I'm unoffendable. Like, I am unoffendable. There's nothing anybody can say to me. You can make fun of me, make fun of my hair, make fun of what, I don't care. Because if you're an asshole, I'm going to ignore you. And if you've got good feedback, I'm going to listen to you. So like, but I think when people say that, and just don't worry about being perfect, just have a go. Because to me, the most important thing is it's a sequence step of lots of quick wins. You know, going back to my son, like, he's learning the piano right now, and he's using this app called Musician, and first lesson was easy, and then he started getting frustrated because he couldn't keep moving forward. But what I love about Musician is it's broken into like lots of tiny little baby steps, and I think we do the same thing with starting an open source. Just, it doesn't have to be perfect, but if you can find somebody, a friend, a colleague, even just going into a forum and saying, can anybody help me out? A lot of people are out there who will help, and I think having that mentor will really help a lot in getting started.
And one thing I've learned, I was at a open source event in person just recently, and a lot of them were students or just starting as a student in computer science, or just graduating. And one person was like, I'm like desperately looking for an open source project to contribute to, and they were going through different repos, and like looking for, like, trying to rush into finding an issue to contribute to, but just felt clueless when opening each issue. I'm like, okay, let's first off, the first step you need to do is like fork the, or I would just like say the steps in with Git. And this person was like confused on those steps. Like, and I didn't realize that person didn't know anything about Git and GitHub. Like, well, let's take a big step back first. Like, you need to understand these. This is what you need to learn when it comes to GitHub. And then when you understand this, then here's like an easy GitHub repo for practicing your contributions before you actually go into a real one.
Totally agree.
Keep things simple. Like, but it's not that person's fault. Like, sometimes they just don't know, like, they don't know what that first step is. And where the focus should be. It's overwhelming. There's just so much to learn.
And I think one of the things that people often forget who've been doing open source for a long time is it's super weird. Like, downloading somebody's code to your hard disk and then editing it and then submitting this thing called a pull request, and you got to go and read all this documentation first. And even if you're like a pretty experienced developer, like, it's just a really odd thing, and everything's out in the open, and people are very self-conscious about that. And I know a lot of people are like, well, what if this doesn't go well, and then future employers can find it? And it's like, no one cares that much about you. Like, no one's looking for your first pull request. Like, it's super weird, and that's why I think, to your point, Tess, like, keep it really simple and just focus on doing something. It's better to do something and it suck than to do nothing because you want to be perfect. That to me has always been kind of my take of these things.
It's so true. And sometimes you have to take a step back from after taking a step back. And after I mentioned that, it's like, what if I don't want to learn how to use Git? What if that's like not something I want to do? And I'm like, okay, let's take a step back again. I want you to do some research and understand why developers use Git, what are the benefits, and why people move away from versioning their files. Like, what is the purpose and why? And rather than just telling that person, no, you don't have a choice, you have to. Like, when someone hears that, it's like they can't really relate or understand it. So giving them something to research.
And there's one more thing which I'll say, and some people may disagree with me on this, and I totally respect if they do. For years, I was kind of parroting out like, oh, the way in which you get started is you join a project and you go and fix a bug, an issue. But to me, I'm increasingly the view that that's further down the line. Like, to me, the first couple of contributions should be things that are relevant and interesting to you, that are in your world, that ideally help you in some kind of way and helps the project. Because I think most people, when they join a project, issues are other people's problems that they need fixing. Usually, they're reported by people who experience a bug. I mean, obviously, it's everybody's issue because it's a shared project. But to me, I would always recommend, like, start with doing something that's relevant to you, and then once you kind of got the hang of it, and once you got that confidence, then I think being a good citizen and going in and issue triage and picking out issues and, and solving them is a great place to go.
Yeah, I love that. My very first code contribution wasn't something I was just trying to randomly find and enforce and try to figure out. I was actually volunteering on a support forum, mostly to learn how to be more technical. And someone said, hey, I can't get this plugin to work. And I realized that there was a bug in the plugin and the developers didn't have time to fix it. So I'm like, I'm going to just spend a few hours reading the code and understanding it. I'm like, oh, wait, this is a really easy fix. It took me a while to adjust my brain to understanding what is happening, because it's the first time I'm looking at it. And then I put in the PR, it got accepted. And then I responded to the forum post and oh my God, everyone was shocked. You took the time to do this for just, for someone who signed up for free on a free support forum. But
that must have been super rewarding as well. I can imagine.
So it was such a good feeling for them to be just so happy. Just their happiness gave me a memory that's going to last a lifetime now. And this was back in 2012 or 11-ish.
Love it. Yeah. Super cool.
I'm sure you get asked often, what is an example of a really good, strong open source community, or community in general, or contributor community? Do they ask for examples of people you work with or consult with?
Yeah, definitely. And I try to pull out examples that are relevant to their space. But there's a number of projects that immediately spring to mind for me. I mean, I think a lot of the projects in the Linux Foundation, Kubernetes, is a great example. A lot of the projects in the CNCF. I have a soft spot for many projects as well. I have a real soft spot for Blender, the 3D editing software, because I spent a little bit of time in that world when I started out, when I was a student. And I love, there's a lot of great projects where the commercial model hasn't really happened, but people just love it and they keep going, right? I love projects like GNOME and KDE. I think, without wishing to sound controversial, Linux on the desktop hasn't really worked out in competing broadly in the market with Windows. But I think a lot of people love their Linux desktop and they much prefer it to the commercial alternatives. And you've got these really nice communities like GNOME and KDE and Elementary and places like that. So I just think there's so many wonderful examples out there where people just build really cool software. And again, it's not just the software, it's the relationships and it's the education, it's the learning, and it's just a net positive experience for pretty much most people.
I love that. The more information and educational materials there are, the easier it is to onboard new people to your community. And something that I take seriously is, if there's anyone in our community asking a question, we should be documenting those questions. And then seeing what becomes common questions. Oh, are they looking for a tutorial on how to do something? We should create that immediately. If someone's asking, then for sure it's going to be someone else that's going to be asking the same question. It's not going to be a one-off question. And just making that assumption and just helps a lot. I know we're hitting on an hour already. Would there be any final advice or anything that's inspirational to people who are viewing this now, or people who are viewing the recorded version later, to help them in their career and journey?
I think the only thing I would say is, it can be easy to like watch these kinds of streams and to say, yeah, well, Tessa and John have been doing this for a long time, and it might sound very easy when we talk about it, but everybody's journey starts in the same. It doesn't start from the same starting point, but everybody starts at the beginning. And the one thing I would just say is just get out there and do it, and don't worry about failure, and just have a go. Again, not everybody's watching your every move. And the more you learn, the more you grow, and the more you challenge yourself, I think the better your experience will be. To me, I forget who said it once, but I think it was Mark Cuban once said, if you're a hard worker, you'll never be poor. And to me, if you're a hard worker, you'll always be able to develop knowledge and experience and expertise, no matter where you are in the world and no matter where your starting point is.
I absolutely love that. I think when I first started in tech, there wasn't a lot of information and resources, especially when I started learning how to code in like 2001-ish. I've always learned that I had to self-teach myself most things. So I spent more time doing than trying to figure out how to do something. So it just changed my perspective on learning. So just find something, stick with it, and try to figure it out. If you can't figure it out, that's where the learning starts, is working through that.
Exactly.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining the stream. I know you're a very busy person, and I know every comment and advice we provide is going to probably change someone else's life. And that's one of my favorite things. Like, what inspires me is helping new developers or helping people who are students. So many times through my life, I've had people reach out and say, hey, you gave me this advice, or I watched one of your videos, or I read something you wrote like from 5 years ago. And they told me how it changed their life. They have a career, or they started their business because I told them that they should, and their business is doing really well. Like, everything you say to someone, they take it very seriously, and it sticks to them. So I just mentoring and just helping others is such a good feeling.
Yeah, no, I love it. And I appreciate you inviting me on here, Tess. It was great to catch up with you, and nice to virtually spend some time with everybody. So
yes, thank you so much. And yeah, have a wonderful day. And I will go ahead and end the stream. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.